And now for part 2 of my miscarriage story. I shared in part 1 about Zachariah, our first boy, and after him, that was a lot of pain, and so I would love to give a shout out to those of you in the YouTube community who I reached out to. You didn't know, but you saved my sanity some days. I was just a mess, in bed, curled up as a ball, bawling, didn't want to eat, everybody goes through it differently, so I recognize that not everyone would do the same thing, go through the same paths, and that is what I did. And I found comfort in knowing others had made it through something similar. I mean, I never take comfort in the fact that others have gone through the pain. That's not a pain that you ever want to wish on anyone. And there's a comfort in community, and I found that community. So thank you to those of you who were part of my community at that time. I'm thinking of Daily Bumps with Missy and Brian. I'm thinking of Ellie and Jared, Meekum, and others. Those were my stays some days, so thank you to those. And so during that time, it was one of those, how could I get pregnant again? What if this happens again? And it goes through your mind. And so when we did get pregnant, so the first miscarriage happened in January. The second positive pregnancy test came back in June. So it was about 6 months later. I was definitely wanting to be pregnant, and yet so scared. I mean, I didn't enjoy that pregnancy, and if there's anything I've learned from my experience of 3 pregnancies and 2 miscarriages, it's to enjoy every moment, because if it doesn't continue, you've at least enjoyed the moments you've had, and if it does continue, you have a lot of moments to enjoy. So that for me was a big learning tool that I hope to employ in all aspects of my life, not just pregnancy and those facets. So the second time we got pregnant, I was so nervous, and it was 4th of July weekend. I was at a friend's house. Actually, it was 4th of July, and I believe it was a Friday. I'd have to remember because it was over the weekend that things progressed. Maybe it was a Saturday. And I was at a friend's house. My husband and I were there, and we were excited. We hadn't told anyone yet because of our experience with the first pregnancy and miscarriage. We were wanting to not tell friends, and I went to the bathroom and I noticed that I was spotting, and that really scared me. But I thought, it was about 7.5 weeks at that point, and I thought, there could be some residual spotting. So let's see how this goes. Well, that night it was still there, a little bit heavier, and then that next morning it was definitely heavier, and I was so scared and frustrated and angry, and you have all these emotions where you think, again, really? Can I not just have a baby like I see everyone else around me has? And some people look at the opposite sex and get pregnant, and here we struggle to get pregnant the first time, have a miscarriage, and we were blessed to be able to get pregnant within 3 months because we started trying 3 months after the first miscarriage. So that was a blessing. And then I thought, really? That is it? I was just so, anyways, we went to urgent care and they did an ultrasound, and I was 7.5 weeks at that point, and the baby was measuring maybe 5 weeks, and they couldn't find the pole. And they found the sac, but they couldn't find the pole. That means that the baby is progressing and growing. And so the ultrasound tech was trying to tell me, oh no, it should be fine, sometimes this happens. And then in my back of my head, I'm thinking, this baby is measuring more than 2 weeks smaller than it should. And I just knew in my heart. And so with the first miscarriage, we found out at the doctor's office, and I had held the baby for almost 4 weeks and my body had not expelled the baby. And so this time around I thought, great, am I gonna have to do another D&C? And so that's why we had elected the first time to do a D&C, because my body obviously wasn't waiting around, and I had a hard time personally grappling with taking a pill to encourage that activity. So that's not to say it's good or bad, it's just at that time my emotions couldn't handle that thought process, and so we had opted for a D&C the first time around. And so now that we're facing this potentially again, I thought, well, maybe my body will do what it needs to do and I don't have to make that decision. And that's actually ended up what happened, which, I mean, if gratefulness fits into this scenario, it was there. And that next day was Monday, and I stayed home from work, and we had told a couple of my family to say, yeah, we're pregnant, but it's not looking good. And so they were praying and checking in and trying to be positive by saying, you know, sometimes people just bleed. And they were saying, do you have cramps? And I wasn't having cramps. I was feeling pressure, but I wasn't having cramps. And then on Tuesday, I started having cramps. And my husband is a physician, and he has 12-hour shifts, and so that was his work week. He went in the morning, and I was starting to bleed heavier at this point, and it was definitely bright red, which is not generally a good sign. For some people, it doesn't mean anything negative, but for me, it meant negative. And I remember laying in bed, crying my eyes out, knowing what was coming, and saying, God, I can't do this alone. Please wait for Craig to come home. And God answered my prayer. And for those of you who believe in a supreme being who cares and loves you, this was an example that I will never forget, where I felt his presence and I felt him reach out and hug me. Not that I felt him physically, but I spiritually could feel his presence and his desire to be close to me. Not that he caused it, but that he was with me through the sorrow. And that's a gift I will never forget. And I praise God for his presence, knowing that he didn't cause this horrible, horrible thing, but he was with me. And for that I'm grateful. And God answered that prayer. The cramps went away. And they didn't start again until after my husband was home and we had dinner. And the cramps started in full force at that point. And so starting about 9 o'clock that night, cramps, and then by midnight, I ended up passing the baby. And I was prepared physically for it. That's not even the right way to say it. Meaning I had prepared for this event by asking Craig to get a container, and I prayed that I would be able to, because I wanted testing to see, is there something genetic, is this something that we need to be concerned about, things we need to check. And so I prayed that I would be able to retrieve the baby, or what had passed, and I was able to, which I praise God for. And so the next day I actually had my first appointment, and I went in, and the nurse practitioner saw me, and they took the remains and tested it, and baby had no, at least common genetic defects, which was, again, there's no positives in this really, and yet that was looked at as a positive. And then we found out he was a boy, our second boy. The first one was a boy, Zachariah. This one we named Xander. So we have our Z boys, Zachariah and Xander. And this time around, it was still extremely painful, excruciatingly painful, and yet different. It's interesting how going through the same process twice has differing effects. And everybody, of course, approaches it differently. And, of course, Craig was very supportive, a gift, and we worked through it together, and of course, we have different ways of doing that. I am grateful that I now have a sleeping boy in the back. In fact, I'm in the car because we pulled into the garage and I don't want to wake him up before he goes through a cycle. If I wake him up any sooner than half an hour, he's crankier than necessary. So again, I'm in the car waiting for him to sleep. You might even hear him rumbling in the back. He's got a little congestion, poor thing. And he did this to me, but I'm okay. It's called tenosynovitis, which is also known as mother's wrist, which is at the base of the thumb. It's painful on occasion, but it's a gift. And so to those of you who have gone through miscarriage and multiple miscarriages, there's hope. There is hope. And I don't know what that hope means for you, but cling to it. Whatever it is, cling to it. And I applaud you and I uplift you, and I'm grateful that we have a community. Reach out. I'm here. Others are here. We can communicate together and commune, and I am excited for the hope that's on the horizon for all of us.